Hi, everyone. I'm Susanna Calvert, founder and convener for Mission and Vision for the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. This talk/workshop was put together because of a conversation I had with my colleague here in the foundation, Allie Fisher, about how challenging life is, and it can feel really hopeless. And though it is true that life is very challenging, all over the world, I'm actually a person of a great deal of hope and faith as well. And I thought it would be helpful to share my view. So what we're going to do is we're going to just talk about the world today a little bit, and you're going to do some reflections, and then I'm going to lay out a hopeful path for you, and hopefully some food for thought for you to be finding your own path of hope going forward. So I don't know if you've heard the term VUCA. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this term was coined well before pandemic and some of the more recent issues and the war. It feels even more true now. And it seems like it is just feeling that we are way in over our heads, but the world is impossibly complex so that we cannot understand it fully. Even one aspect of it is so complicated we can't understand it fully. And so finding a path forward can feel very challenging and overwhelming. And even before the pandemic, there were great challenges that we pretty much swept under the carpet. It's harder to do so now because some of these issues, especially around mental health, have really come to a head to the point where they really can't be ignored, even though I would argue that that was that way before the pandemic. This is data from the National Association of the Mentally Ill that, again, before the pandemic, the data from 2020, or just at the start of the pandemic, it was published in 2020, that 20% of people experienced a mental illness. 1 in 20 or 5% was a serious illness, and 1 in 15 had it accompanied by a substance use disorder. And over 12 million people had serious thoughts of suicide. These numbers were also growing in youth that they just define as 12 and older, who are increasing their tendency to drink or use drugs. So this is obviously very concerning, and it has only probably gotten worse. So this is where I would invite you to pause the video and reflect on what is most concerning to you, and to just think about that. I would suggest you don't spend longer than a couple of minutes, because we don't want to dwell here. We want to move forward. So hit the pause button for a couple minutes and reflect on what's most concerning to you. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about an alternative view and the path forward. To me, as I mentioned earlier, it's very hopeful. My goal is to have you identify a hopeful path forward for yourself. So I've always heard this saying, and I don't know if it's true, despite the fact that I'm Chinese American. My Mandarin is pretty terrible to non-existent, and my ability to read is even worse. But you might have heard the saying that the Chinese word for crisis is a combination of danger and opportunity. And we are having so much danger. People are literally dying and becoming incapacitated, losing their jobs, homelessness, mental illness, disease and illness of all kinds, conflict, war even. So there is danger everywhere. And that also means that the opportunity is proportionally available to us. So it's not that I suggest that we ignore the danger. I suggest that we notice the danger and move into the opportunity phase of it as soon as possible. And there is a frame to do that I think is really helpful to think about and embrace as as we think about moving out into opportunity. And it has to do with this construct developed by a scholar now deceased named Joseph Campbell, who studied comparative mythology. So he studied all the fables, tales, legends, stories, religions across time and culture. So he's looking at all of the stories of humanity for the common threads and asked, what are we supposed to learn from this? And he named the most pervasive theme as the hero's journey. And I'm going to refer to it as the hero's journey because Campbell was also a scholar of his time. I think he passed in the 80s or so. And so it was a different worldview that he had at the time. So I'm just going to refer to it as the hero's journey to be more gender neutral. But you're familiar with the hero's journey because of all of the, or most of the beloved tales of our time have this general framework. This framework is described by Campbell in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and also The Power of Myth. And there's a beautiful documentary about him and a series of interviews with Bill Moyers. And there's also, as I mentioned, this counter narrative about the heroine's journey. Again, I'm just going to refer to it as the hero's journey. But in any case, if you imagine the beloved tales of heroes in our culture, like maybe Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz or Luke Skywalker, there's countless such stories, that they all have a familiar pattern that deeply resonate with us. So in each case, the hero leaves their ordinary world, their home, and they venture out on a journey greater than themselves. Initially, it seems like they're there to vanquish some type of villain, a bad guy or a bad gal, but eventually the hero realizes that in order for them to prevail, that they must actually journey inward, that if the challenge is this big, then they have to go inside and become bigger than the challenge itself by internal growth. And if they are then successful in making that transformation, then they return and they are successful in beating the bad guy or bad gal, and doors seem to fly open. It seems like help comes out of nowhere, maybe by supernatural help, and it feels as if they're flying on the wings of destiny, and they return home bearing a gift from their journeys, which, according to Campbell, is the lost wisdom of their generation. Through this process, they encounter mentors, challenges, enemies, and very dark places where they experience hopelessness. And so some of these themes might feel very familiar to you right now, especially the dark place. And I also think rock bottom plays into the stories quite a bit. So for those of you who are experiencing or have experienced these really dark places, these rock bottom moments, they're actually part of your, I would suggest that they're part of your hero's journey, and you're exactly where you need to be. So the way that this storyline is often told is presented as a circle in this manner. Again, the heroes in the ordinary world, and they go around, they leave their home. Sometimes they get launched because of a rock bottom moment, or just an enticing invitation or a circumstance that they cannot control. And they go through this cycle, and it goes all the way around. Now, the thing that Campbell, I don't believe, explicitly discusses is what happens when the hero returns home, because the hero returns home transformed, bearing the lost gift, but the hero is different, and the gift also changes their ordinary world. So by pursuing the journey, the hero actually elevates themselves and their world. So they don't end up in the same place, in my view. they end up, some increment of space above where they started. And I also believe that we pursue this journey repeatedly. Like we rise to meet one challenge, and then we get called to another, and we go around and around, up and up. So to me, this is actually an upward spiral. And inherent in this is also what is becoming popularly known as a growth mindset, because research is showing that people who believe they can learn and grow and change are more likely to be successful and happy compared to those who do not. So the Shiro's journey implies that there is a growth mindset, because failure to learn just means you're going to get stuck in that deep, dark spot. I'm going to talk about a couple of more elements of this journey in a few minutes, but I want to just give my own example, because I've been cycling through this either knowingly or unknowingly most of my life. And the one that was really big was I was called out of my ordinary world when I got everything I ever wanted and realized I wasn't happy. So I'm of Chinese descent, and so we have this pretty clear checklist, which is pretty much explicit. It's not even unstated, it's pretty explicit. And when I checked off all those boxes, including getting tenure at the age of 36, I was pretty miserable, and my health and my marriage was in ruins. And so I gave it all up. I gave up tenure, which was pretty unheard of, and eventually gave up the marriage and went on, in hindsight, what was a pursuit of meaning and authenticity. Because though my work was very meaningful, it wasn't, the way I was approaching it wasn't exactly me. And so I eventually realized that I had a calling, which I stumbled upon, which was to do professional and personal development, leadership and career development. And I went back to school to get a degree in the science of well-being, which is applied positive psychology, because my pharmaceutical science degree wasn't really helpful in that regard. And in that process of doing my capstone, I studied callings, and I discovered the Shiro's journey. And it just explained so much to me about my path, and how after going through this really dark phase, that I came out the other end as if doors were flying open. I was receiving supernatural help, and I was flying on the wings of destiny. And I would just add that I was a total atheist at this time, but that's exactly what it felt like the heavens had opened their doors up to me. And so when I encountered my next challenges, I knew what this was, and I knew that I could just lean into it. And by moving, embracing the learning and the inner transformation, when I was in those dark places, I knew I could move to the other side more readily. And I want you to just think about how this plays out in the public arena. I just picked 3 examples of people who have experienced trauma or extraordinary loss. These 3, the Susan G. Komen, Cameron K. Gallagher, which is a local organization, and Mothers Against Drug Driving, all came about because of a tragic loss. And I am sure they would not wish that loss on anyone. And these, the loved ones of these deceased, just saw an opportunity and a need. And my own loss also led me to give up my dream job and start a nonprofit called the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. So I'm going to ask you to just pause the video again and to think about some examples, whether in the public arena or in your own life, where somebody experienced a loss or a trauma or a major setback, and then rose up to meet the challenge and created great change. So I'm going to just ask you to pause the video and think about this for a couple of minutes. And if you want to spend a little extra time on this, I think that would be worthwhile if you felt like it. Okay, so I'll tell you about my own tragic loss. So after I went through this major career change and transformation, I ended up finding my dream job at the University of Georgia, So I moved from Richmond to Athens in 2016 with my now second husband, Chris. And so we were there pretty much getting settled in when a year and a half into it, after losing my sister to cancer, we learned of Chris's stage 4 cancer as well. And he passed away 7 months later. I knew in the minute that I needed, in the moment that I needed to lean into post-traumatic growth. So this idea that we don't necessarily have to succumb to trauma, that we can actually grow. And I think I heard a statistic recently that something like 70% of the time people actually can experience great growth. So I said, this is one heck of a challenge. So I'm going to lean into what must be one heck of a series of growth opportunities. So around the time Chris passed away, 7 months later, I received divine inspiration to quit my dream job, move back to Richmond, put all my savings into starting the Foundation for Family and Community Healing with our mission, which is to help us all learn to create healthy and rewarding relationships with ourselves, each other, Earth, and the loving force that connects us. And even though it was a long and devastating journey, I also know that I could always see the light at the end of the tunnel, because I knew about the hero's journey process and what could be available to me at the other end. So I just had a lot of trust in it, especially with my newfound spirituality. And 3.5 years later, I feel like I can say that that the opportunities that have manifested from those traumas have been on par with my loss, if not greater. So I want to talk about a couple of the more challenging parts of the hero's journey, because the beautiful parts, the resurrection, return, and rewards, are just exhilarating and addictive. And honestly, I want to spend my whole life in that phase. It's just not really possible. I mean, because it is when we experience the most challenging parts is when we experience that breakthrough growth and insight. And so the hardest, one of the hardest parts is the innermost cave. And Campbell likens it to the Jonah and the whale story, where Jonah is in the belly of the whale. And so if you can imagine that it is this dark place where there's no way out. The more modern example that I love is from the first Star Wars movie, where Luke, Han, and Leia are in this room full of trash and there is no way out. And just when they thought it couldn't get any worse, right, the walls and the ceilings start to come in. It's actually a trash compactor. Somehow they manage to just fly out, but I think that metaphor is how we are feeling now, or we have felt, trapped and nowhere to go, and the pressure is on. And this is actually, I think, one of the most important moments of the hero's journey, because when we have tried everything we can think of and we are just stuck in this horrible, nasty, stinky, disgusting, hopeless place, is when we crack open our beliefs and perspective, to let go of what got us there and what is keeping us stuck. So that is when we are willing to do that inner work, that inner exploration, that inner examination of where we are, why we're there, and what's really our inner truth. So we have to go deeper and deeper until we find that truth, because once we find that truth, then we find our way out. So this is a very difficult phase. It is also the most important and valuable in my mind. When I was in the university, even before I was doing my professional development work, people would just come to me and tell me what's going on. And oftentimes they'd be in my office crying and they've clearly hit rock bottom. And I would just say, congratulations, you've hit rock bottom. That is so great. And they would look at me like I'm nuts. And I would explain to them why. And knowing that this is a valuable mechanism to deepen our wisdom and insight, I think can help people move through it. And then my colleagues are always like, Susanna, why are people crying in your office all the time? but anyway, so I hope this can really help you reframe what your challenges are and what they offer. Similarly, according to Campbell, there are tests, enemies, and allies. So for some of us, the allies, it's hard for us sometimes to ask for help or to see the help that we need when it is being offered to us, because we might be thinking it's something else. Like we're still viewing the situation through our old self, our old paradigm, instead of the one that is inviting us to grow into. So part of some of us, our hero's journey might be allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and ask for help. And the tests are really there for us to see if we're ready to move to the next stage. So if we keep experiencing the same thing over and over again, it's because we haven't learned what we needed to learn. Because if the test came and we just sailed right through, then we know we're ready. So for me, a lot of times, just feeling the pain of the situation was a test that for whether or not I could be peaceful and joyful in the face of great challenge. And if things really upset me and I ruined my joy or didn't feel peaceful, then I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready, and I needed to learn how to retain my power and my peace, my confidence, and feeling good and grounded. Same is true with enemies. Enemies are really our teachers. They're here to show us where we have work to do. And if there is an annoying or challenging person in your life, if you would grow to be bigger than that challenge, then it would be sort of like a gnat, you encountering a gnat that you could just ignore or just work through it, as opposed to it being, a zombie apocalypse kind of thing. So the people that we feel are the most challenging in our lives are really there to teach us and to test us, to show us where we need to learn and grow. And once we can rise above that challenge, then we move on to the next phase. We can leave the inner cave. I bought this painting around the time I moved back to Richmond. I think it really captures the mood of what this journey can feel like, even though you have allies and all of that and loved ones. In the end, you have to go inside on your own. That is a journey that you have to take by yourself. But if you do, then you experience that road back, reward, and resurrection, those doors flying open as if you have supernatural help, and as I like to call it, as if you're flying on the wings of destiny. So I mentioned that this most recent challenge for me led to starting the Foundation for Family and Community Healing, where we're offering skill development, online learning to youth and adults everywhere in the world on a gift economy. And it's on the whole spectrum of learning of how to be in right relationship with everybody and everything. On the spectrum of our relationship with ourselves, each other, Earth, and the loving force that connects us. I believe that climate change is in part, or at least is fundamentally a relationship issue, that we have a deteriorating relationship with Earth that is not just physical, it's also psychological, emotional, and spiritual. And that is why at the heart of it, we have not made more progress with climate change. And so this is a viewpoint we're bringing to the world through the foundation as well. And again, it is on this whole spectrum. Right now we have 10 learning modules with our foundational our flagship module being relationship well-being. So it's about knowing yourself, and managing each other, managing others, which is also the foundation for leadership development. So we're offering a growing array of modules on the spectrum. I mentioned Earth and climate change, and we are advocating that we regard Earth as a loved one that's ailing, and that we treat Earth the exact same way. So if our favorite aunt were in serious condition, we would want to go spend time with her, be present, offer her grooming or nutritional support, or consult the doctors. We would entertain her and try to uplift her spirits. We would tell her how much we loved her and appreciate her. We would reminisce about good times with her. We would notice how she's doing and how beautiful she is. And we might write a poem for her or sing a song. And of course, we would include her in our prayers or meditations. So these are just the very intuitive things that we do for loved ones. And I feel that this is something that we can all do for Earth as well, in the way that suits us, is unique for us. Our larger purpose is for us to provide the education that humanity needs to create a more beautiful world. And to provide everyone the skills they need to be successful citizens of humanity and Earth, not just their schools and workplaces. So I like to also think about this in terms of the way we implement it in our lives, because I'm not sure about the scholarship on this, but our culture feels to me to be overwhelmingly on the yang side of the yin-yang, construct, where yang is about work and the material world and our thoughts and concreteness, logic, whereas the yin is more our intuitive, emotional, relational side. So for us to really find the solutions that we need going forward and to be more whole, that we embrace both the yin and the yang, so that they're in balance, but also integrated. Because if you remember from the yin yang symbol, the dark side also has, the dark dot, which in the light side, on the opposite end, the opposite, whatever this little swish is called, which, and vice versa, which indicates integration. So it's not to say that we don't have yang and that we don't work hard, but that we do both. We find balance. So we work hard and we work soft. So there's a place for controlling, directing, thinking, making it happen, using metrics and assigning, but there's also an equal and opposite space for the integration of trust, collaboration, feelings and intuition, allowing things to emerge, purpose and relationship driven values, and co-creating. And that as we are moving through the Shiro's journey and our purpose, and as we're making decisions about what to do and how to do it, that we adopt both. So as I mentioned, my belief is that we all journey around the Shiro's journey circle, going higher and higher with each cycle, and that we do it not only as an individual, but we do it as a collective, and that we tap into both our cognitive and our emotional and spiritual and intuitive and relational, and that we can really elevate who we are and who we can become, and that we are invited to ascend the spiral, that this is the purpose of life and the purpose of the challenges we face. And if you'll notice the spiral, if you go up the spiral, you have to go in through the shadows. Like, you can't just go up the middle. So going into that shadow side, the dark side, the belly of the whale, is part of the process. I wanted to show you this picture because right around the time we were learning that Chris was sick, he used to draw my bath for me every night. And when he became too weak to do that, I started to draw my own bath, and this was in Athens. And what I would see in the foam every night for months on end was this spiral that would just form completely without me going near or touching it. And it was just like the most beautiful invitation to embark on the Shiro's journey. And I knew that something was very different in my life, and I couldn't quite understand it. But what I feel like is being available to us now is that the more we go up the spiral, the more we go deep into who we are and our authentic selves. And we eventually get to the heart of who we are. And that is that we encounter our soul's purpose, our deepest purpose, the purpose of our higher self. And when we start to live that higher self purpose, that we are actually removing the barriers between our embodied and spiritual selves, and we are creating heaven on earth for ourselves right here, right now, in the midst of all this craziness, all this VUCA. And this is the opportunity that is available to us right now, that all this trauma and chaos is inviting us to go deeper and manifest this so that we can create heaven on earth. So what if we did that not just as an individual, but as a collective? And this is what our invitation is, that we transform our communities and nations and our families as well, and that we embrace all of the challenges for the invitation that it is. So going from this VUCA images that I showed you earlier, this is what is now available to us. So instead of that social fracturing and polarization, we can access our sense of unity because we are all connected. Same with conflict, that we can replace that with love, connection, peace, finding the middle ground, which is most likely a more sustainable solution than anything at the poles. That instead of environmental degradation, we renew our sense of oneness and love and affection for Earth. And instead of disease, that we replace it with thriving and wellness on all levels. And that we're invited to do this for all. So my niche is this education scaled up to the masses, but everybody has their own piece of it, and it all looks different. And so it's there for us to discover. And collectively, if we all lean into what our soul's purpose is, that we will create the transformation that is needed for everybody everywhere. And that if enough of us do it, that will create a tipping point. All those little spirals will add up and magnify, not only here, but everywhere. And the other way that you lean into this is to do what Joseph Campbell suggests, which is to follow your bliss. So the first time I heard that term, I was like, what the heck does that mean? Because, I couldn't even imagine bliss. Like, who has bliss? We have work to do. But what he means by that is follow the thing that you love to do, the thing that feels most meaningful and important, the thing that feels enjoyable, where you lose track of time, where people go, oh my gosh, how did you do that? That was amazing. The thing that people are inviting you to do, like requesting of you, that is your biggest self. And those topics that are just keeping you up at night, that you just really, like, if you could change one thing in the world, that's the thing you would want to do. And I'm going to give you a piece of advice from Scott Allison, who's a professor emeritus, who's an expert on heroes. He said that the thing that a hero or Shiro does in a movie that makes you cry, both for happiness and sadness at the same time. So if you think back, like, on your favorite movies, what is it about that story that is most touching to you? And that might be your guide to how the thing that you should pursue in your own life. So follow your bliss, create that balance between the yin and the yang, the cognitive and the intuitive and the emotional, and let things unfold. Because I discovered by planning every last detail of my life, it got me to what was satisfying to my brain, but not necessarily satisfying to my heart, because I wasn't checking in with my heart. And in the end, that's what matters in terms of how I feel. So let it unfold, follow your heart, follow your bliss, and you might find that life can be better than anything you can ever imagine. So be flexible and follow it where it takes you. So I want to end with one last story from Joseph Campbell. He talks about the story of the princess and the frog. In this tale, a princess is playing with her favorite toy by a river, which is a golden ball, and eventually it ends up in the water, as the queen probably warned her about. And she cries, she's upset, she's distraught. And pretty soon a frog comes by, retrieves the ball and returns it to her. And she's ever so grateful and says to the frog, how can I ever thank you? And the frog asks her to just be his friend. And she runs away. So he uses this as an example of ignoring the call. She was being offered a portal to something greater than herself, and she ignored the call. And according to Campbell, when we ignore the call, we psychologically crucify ourselves, as I had done, ignoring, my purpose in pursuit of what my head thought I should be doing. And I also believe that it is something that the call will get louder and more insistent, and it can often crash our lives down. I had to have my life crash down in order to accept the call to my spiritual self, my spiritual journey. It became an invitation I couldn't refuse. So if you're hitting a rock bottom, maybe you're being called to your adventure, or maybe you're already in the midst of it and looking for that inner growth. So just know that they're beautiful, sometimes terrible invitations at the same time. Okay, so I would like you to spend a moment, pause the video, and think about your Shiro's journey. It can only be one person at a time. Like, you decide for yourself whether or not you're embarking on your journey, and if so, where are you, and what's the next step for you, and how you basically turn crisis into transformation. So I'm going to give you some time to just think about, where are you on your Shiro's journey? If so, where might you be in the process? And what do you need to do in order to move to the next step? Sometimes it might be acceptance. Sometimes it might be letting go and not controlling. Sometimes it might be, oh, I have a lot of learning to do, because, when I made my career change, it's not like I was able to just go, oh, I want to do this, somebody give me a full-time job. It doesn't work that way. I had to go back to school and practice and volunteer my time. It took 4 years. And so these things, this is something that we pursue over our lifetime. So give yourself a few moments, and let me just go over this next slide. You might want to do this in 2 steps. So if you want, pause and go through that reflection. And then when you're done, this is what I want you to think about. I want you to think back to the problem you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the one that keeps you up at night, which is what you feel is the biggest challenge of our time. And if money were no option and failure was not an obstacle, what change would you create and how? So this might inform your goal setting, but maybe not. But I just wanted to give it to you for some food for thought. So pause and reflect on both of these prompts. Okay, so you've thought about whether you're on your journey, where you are, if you are, and what to do next, and whether or not that relates to the grand problem you identified earlier. And I'd like you to also to write down 3 small steps that you can take to move forward. The hero's journey is taken one step at a time. And over a course of a period of time, it looks like a leap, but most of the time these things are taken in baby steps. So write down, if you haven't already, 3 small steps that you can take. Okay, and then when you're done, come back and we'll wrap up. Okay, so hopefully you've at least identified the trailhead to your path to hope and identified some things you need to bring on your journey so that you're prepared or know what to expect and that you commit to embarking on it and creating heaven on earth for yourself and for everybody and everything. So thank you for listening. I hope you will join us at the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. You could find us at healingedu.org. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can also join us on my radio show Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time called Finding Our Fit. You can also find information for that on the Work FM. We're also streaming on Facebook Live and YouTube and on the radio dial here in Richmond, 93.9 FM. And of course, I want to invite you to participate in our online learning because you might need to develop some skills on your hero's journey. And we offer these learning modules on a gift economy basis. So feel free to pay what you're able, share it with everybody you know, because this is a transformation that we need everywhere and for everybody in some respects. So thanks for participating. I'm Susanna Calvert. Here's my contact information. You can also check out my personal webpage at susannacalvert.com, and happy travels.